There's something deeply unsettling about the truth when you actually see it, when it grips you, when it drags you out of the safety of the crowd and demands you carry something. That's when you know you've been chosen. And being chosen is not an easy thing. You've been told that divine favor looks like comfort, but that's not true. The greatest men in history, those who left their mark on civilization, they were burdened, not blessed, in the way we think of blessings. Look at Moses, standing before a sea that would not part until he commanded it. Look at Christ, bearing a cross meant to destroy him. These men were anointed, but it didn't bring them peace. It brought them weight. If you see these signs in your own life, you need to understand something. You're in dangerous territory. There is an idea, ancient and powerful, that those who are truly called, those who are marked for something greater, do not walk an easy road. The world would have you believe that divine favor manifests as ease, that the evidence of purpose is found in comfort, admiration, and effortless success. But that is a lie, a deep and dangerous one. The men who shook the foundations of history, the ones who left an indelible mark on civilization, did not live lives of leisure. They were burdened, they were crushed, torn apart and reassembled under the weight of something far greater than themselves. When you are truly anointed, when you are set apart for something that transcends the ordinary, you do not feel light, you feel the weight. This is the first and most undeniable sign of a dangerous calling, the unbearable responsibility that settles onto your shoulders like an iron yoke. It is not a fleeting sensation, it does not pass with time, it lingers deep in your bones, a constant and unrelenting reminder that you were not made for trivial things. It starts subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. You wake up with thoughts that will not let you rest. You begin to notice things that others overlook, the dishonesty, the contradictions, the injustices that are dismissed as normal. You start to feel an agitation, a restlessness that cannot be ignored. You try to silence it, to go about your days like everyone else, pretending that the questions in your mind are insignificant. But they are not. They grow louder, more persistent, until you reach a point where ignoring them becomes more painful than confronting them. And then the weight descends. It is not a burden of external suffering alone, though that may come. It is the burden of sight, of knowing too much, of seeing the cracks in the foundation of the world and realizing that you are being called to do something about it. That is where the terror sets in, because the moment you accept this weight, you know, truly know, that there is no going back. The burden isolates you. It changes the way you speak, the way you think, the way you engage with the world. Conversations that once seemed satisfying now feel hollow. The trivialities that others indulge in, the mindless entertainment, the small talk, the games of social maneuvering become unbearable. Not because you despise them, but because they no longer fit. You feel an ever-widening chasm between yourself and those around you, a disconnect that cannot be bridged by mere words. And then something even more insidious happens. The people who once embraced you begin to pull away. They sense the change, though they do not understand it. Your presence unsettles them, not because you have wronged them, not because you have become cruel or indifferent, but because you have become different. You carry something now, a fire, a sharpness, an intensity that makes others uneasy. They do not want to be reminded of the weight they have refused to carry. You start to realize that this is not a phase. It is not a temporary affliction that will fade with time. It is a fundamental shift, a transformation that has altered you at the core. You cannot go back to who you were before. You have been pulled out of the shallow waters and cast into the deep, and the deep does not return its travelers. The burden is heavy. It crushes lesser men. It demands everything. And yet, the ones who bear it, the ones who do not flee, become something unbreakable. But that is not a choice made in comfort. It is made under the weight of an unbearable responsibility, the kind that separates the ordinary from the anointed. There is a pattern, ancient and unavoidable, that governs the lives of those who are truly called to something greater. It is not a pattern of ease, nor one of immediate recognition. It is instead a pattern of separation, of being removed from the familiar, from the comfortable, from the noise of the crowd. It is the pattern of isolation, And if you do not understand it, if you do not recognize its necessity, you will resist it. You will think it is a punishment, a miscalculation, an injustice. But it is not. It is a requirement. It happens in ways that are often imperceptible at first. The world around you begins to shift. The things that once gave you joy no longer satisfy you in the same way. The people you once resonated with begin to feel distant. You may not even know why, but there is a growing sense that you are being pulled away from something. It feels like exile, like rejection, like loss. And in many ways it is, but it is also something far greater: preparation. Before any man steps into true influence, he must first learn what it means to stand alone. This is not an option. It is not an unfortunate side effect of greatness. It is the furnace that forges it. The weight of leadership, of purpose, of calling is not something that can be carried by those who still need the validation of the crowd. It requires a kind of internal fortitude that cannot be developed in the midst of constant approval. And so, before you are given influence, you are removed. It is in this removal that the true test begins, because isolation is not merely about being physically alone. It is about being stripped of all the things you once leaned on. It is about losing the familiar voices, the reassuring structures, the comfortable distractions. It is about standing face to face with yourself, without the noise of the world to drown out your own thoughts. This is where most people falter. They seek to escape it. They run back to old habits, to old relationships, to anything that will numb the discomfort of solitude. But those who do this never reach true influence. They remain dependent on the opinions and expectations of others, unable to stand on their own. Isolation does something that nothing else can. It forces you to confront yourself. It strips away the facades, the pretenses, the carefully constructed identities you have built for the sake of acceptance. It reveals what is weak in you, what is false, what is still tied to the shallow desires of approval and belonging. And in that confrontation, you are given a choice to either fortify what is real or to crumble under the weight of what is not. This is why those who have shaped the world, those who have altered the course of history, have always walked through seasons of solitude. It is not an accident that Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before leading a nation, that Christ withdrew into the desert before stepping into his purpose, that every man who has ever carried something truly significant has first been pulled away from the crowd, because influence is dangerous when given too soon. It amplifies what is already within a man, and if that man has not been forged in the fire of isolation, what is amplified will be weakness, not strength. In this place of solitude, the distractions are gone, and what remains is the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are and what you must become. It is uncomfortable. It is painful. It is the kind of pain that makes lesser men turn back. But those who endure it, those who stay in the wilderness until it has done its work, emerge as something different. They are no longer swayed by the opinions of the masses. They do not seek validation. They do not bend to the ever-shifting winds of social approval. They have been stripped down to something unshakable. And when they return, they do not return as the same men who left. The weight of isolation has carved them into something else, something that no longer needs permission to speak, to act, to lead. They do not ask for influence. It follows them, not because they chased it, but because they survived what others could not. There is a dangerous illusion that has embedded itself into the minds of those who dream of greatness. It is the idea that purpose, true purpose, will come with applause, that it will be welcomed, celebrated, embraced by the world, that the moment you step into what you were meant to do, the doors will fling open, the crowds will gather, and you will be received with admiration. But history, brutal, unflinching history, tells a different story.